Hello, Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, Forward Together New Orleans, a nonprofit group founded by Mayor LaToya Cantrell, was pushed back this week by a judge ordering that several of its procedures cease. We will examine why. There was some forward direction in the redevelopment of the Municipal Auditorium, though plans to redo the former Lindy Boggs Hospital have stalled. The state auditor raised questions about why insurance companies are pulling out of the state, and the city's inspector general noted shortfalls in the construction of the Hard Rock Hotel. All of this plus forward progress on a proposal to require council approval on mayoral appointees are on the list for tonight's Informed Sources. Mayor Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Michael Finch, staff writer of the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Stephanie Riegel, staff writer, Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL-TV, Channel 4. Okay, David, Forward Together New Orleans. This is really complicated, a lot of directions, et cetera. There was some action this week regarding it. Why don't you tell us what happened?
Right, so a judge ordered the former executive director to acknowledge that he is the former executive director. He was fired by the board of this nonprofit. He can no longer try to access the funds in Liberty Bank of this nonprofit. He can no longer put up a website that says that he's the head of this nonprofit. And this is a nonprofit that was formed by Mayor LaToya Cantrell. The idea was that it would spend private dollars and then later more than $1 million in city money to run welfare programs, things like gun violence prevention programs, COVID relief during the pandemic that it was very successful at doing. But then there was controversy because an organization that was created by the mayor was sending funds without any city council oversight to that entity, Forward Together New Orleans, in agreements that she signed with this gentleman, Sean Randolph. And then Sean Randolph started making allegations that the programs were being mismanaged, that the fund was being mismanaged by the board members, and started making moves to replace those board members. Then after he thought he had replaced those board members, they came back and fired him, and that's what the dispute in court was.
And the other variable in this is this thing called the Wisner Foundation,
right,
which is like 100 years old, and Mr. Wisner way back when to give something to the city.
Right.
And it's still trying to figure out how to spend it, and so you got reflected into this.
So the interesting thing is, with the court order now, the Forward Together New Orleans nonprofit says it's going to dissolve and send back the $1 million to the city that it received from the city, and an additional $500,000 to private donors. But even then, the city will not be able to spend that money because about $850,000 of that is from the Wisner Trust. And the Wisner Trust, in a separate case, has also been frozen because this was a dispute between the city council and the mayor over who controls that money. City council says all of that money should be controlled by the city and be a part of the general fund with oversight of the city council. The mayor in 2020 created a private entity out of that trust and is trying to control it behind closed doors.
Okay, so as far as the Forward Together New Orleans, it was nonprofit, and it also gave money to different other nonprofits, right, for
Correct.
programs, including those within the city for gun violence prevention type of programs.
Right.
Now, those funds were frozen. They've been frozen for a while now, and why?
Since September 8th, when the Inspector General issued a subpoena, and there was this dispute between the executive director, or purported executive director, and the board, the bank where those funds were being held froze the funds because there was this confusion about who really controlled them. The former executive director actually tried to access them through QuickBooks software and was denied. He then tried to say that the money had all been spent. It had not. It had just been frozen by the bank. And so a final determination from the court will allow Liberty Bank to say, okay, we can allow this money to be accessed again, and that's when the board says they're going to send the money back and dissolve the mayor's fund.
Dissolve the whole thing.
So David, what could possibly go wrong with this? I mean, it's just money that's given to the city and it's being dedicated for nonprofit and for civic good.
I mean, the contention is that the money was used appropriately for the civic good, that it did good things during the pandemic, in particular, providing relief for people who really needed it. It could move more kind of swiftly to respond to need. But the concern, of course, from the city council is, hey, if these are $1 million in city funds and potentially more in the future, we need to have control over that money and know where it's going.
Do we know specifically in the past where it's gone?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can see the expenditures. We can see that it went to job training programs. It went to stipends for youth. A lot of this is part of this universal basic income theory that the Mayor Cantrell subscribes to, and is part of a group of mayors across the country that believes that if you essentially pay people a universal basic income, that they'll turn their lives around. Those types of programs have been supported by this in the past using private dollars. The public money that came in earlier this year, in May of this year, has never been used according to FTNL.
Now, the mayor established this fund not just for herself and her term, but for future mayors too, calling it the Mayor Fund, but that's not going to exist anymore.
Exactly.
Not in this form.
And that's the thing, you know, from Mayor Cantrell's perspective, is this was not about her, but then there were questions, and I reported on the fact that she directed some of the money very specifically to pay, like, Mardi Gras Indian chiefs after the Mardi Gras was canceled in 2021, and things like that, that caused some people to allege that it was being used as a slush fund, especially when there's no, public access or availability of the information on how the money is being used.
And this whole thing was run by a board of which the mayor was not a part. Is that
Correct,
Okay.
correct, but appointed to the board, yes.
All right, we'll see where it all goes.
All right.
Thanks a lot, David. Stephanie, let's go on over to you and continuing to talk about Mayor Cantrell and some of her ideas. She's now focused again on Municipal Auditorium. She has some ideas for that.
Right, and this is something that people in the city have been waiting on for so many years, with the auditorium just continuing to languish and deteriorate literally since Hurricane Katrina. Of course, there was a huge fight over getting money from FEMA for it. That was back in the 2014-15 years. The city finally got money, and then, of course, Mayor Cantrell announced that she wanted to move City Hall there, and that went over like a firebomb and erupted in huge controversy from neighborhood groups really concerned about what that would mean to the legacy of Armstrong Park and Congo Square. So she shelved those plans and challenged the neighborhood groups to come up with a plan of their own. Now, the complicating factor is that we do have FEMA money now, 38 million, something like that, that has to be largely spent, or at least, budgeted to be spent by next summer. And so earlier this week, the city posted a request for qualifications. They're now looking to move forward with some of the remediation and repair work that is long overdue. So they're looking for architectural engineering services. But what they said in their basically bid advertisement is that they're also going to be moving forward before the end of the year with a request for proposals for a master developer, a private entity, team of developers, a la Six Flags, which maybe we shouldn't look at as a great example because that's not going so well at the moment, but to come in with a redevelopment plan and work with this stakeholder group of neighborhood activists who rose up last year in opposition. They now call themselves the Save Our Soul Coalition, Coalition Inc. They're a nonprofit organization, and they represent many groups that want to work with the private development team and the city on some sort of multi-purpose use for the site. That would include a museum, maybe, that would pay homage to the city's legacy in creating jazz music, cultural venue, maybe a small performing arts center that would be able to accommodate not large groups. We obviously have a lot of auditoriums and arenas, but a small, more intimate setting for smaller artists, a marketplace for local artisans. Somebody mentioned a supper club. So I think there are a lot of uses with that would be open to
My high school graduation was there.
It was such a wonderful
It was a
building.
great venue. There was a very famous Benny Goodman, I think, opened it in 1930 with a huge show. I mean, it had a lot of cultural.
It's had a lot of uses.
It's had a lot, obviously carnival balls as
right.
well. I think I saw the Mother Teresa there in the 1970s. So, we'll see. Really, this will get interesting in December when we start to hear from developers, in response to an RFP. And I've heard of a couple of Carrie, a couple of people whose names you would know, I'm not going to mention them because nobody's, confirmed it, but I
Right.
know they're development teams with well-known names, people with proven track records who are interested in doing something on this.
But all of the work does not have to be done next summer. We just have to have plans for it in order for FEMA not to take the money back.
Specifically for the remediation work and the cleanup work, new roof repairs, HVAC, getting rid of water, mold, windows, doors, exteriors, that kind of stuff, and a plan for the long-term future moving forward.
Okay, because that's a tight deadline for 30
Yes.
minutes. Yeah, we don't want to lose that money. All righty, thanks a lot, Stephanie. Michael, let's go on over to you. And we're continuing this problem in the state of insurance companies, homeowner insurance, wind and hail insurance, pulling out. And you really are taking a closer look into that.
Yes. This week we got a significant development when the legislative auditor formally asked the insurance commissioner to delve deeper into why many of the companies have failed. Since I'd say a year ago, Commissioner Jim Donnellan has consistently said that many of the companies chose not to buy enough reinsurance, seemingly passing it off on to them as their responsibility. But in the back of everybody's mind is that don't we have a regulator who's supposed to make sure that they buy enough reinsurance? So the legislative auditor this week formally recommended he look into this more closely, and the commissioner agreed that he was going to do that.
Well, how does the reinsurance for the company relate to the insurance offered to the policyholder?
Well, this is, for many of the small companies, this is basically how they guarantee that they can deliver on the contract. A small company that doesn't have a lot of capital, they're not like State Farm, which holds, billions of dollars on its balance sheet. These small companies have to rely on overseas reinsurers as a backstop for the losses that they can't cover. So if you don't have a sufficient reinsurance policy in place and a catastrophe comes, or if you don't have enough reinsurance contracts in place when a catastrophe comes, it means you can't deliver on that promise that you made to homeowners and policyholders.
So the inspection that's being done right now, the investigation into it, are some companies just undervaluing the properties that they are insuring? Is that an issue?
And this is what the legislative auditor did not come in conclusive on the actual cause. They just simply sort of suggested that they had looked into a number of different areas. So there are two theories that I've heard of since, I'd say, April or May. Since, in absence of a formal inquiry into this, the word on the street is that there are, two potentially reasons why the companies have failed. One has been that they were underpricing their products, and somehow this was baked into the recommendation that they got to purchase reinsurance. So if you are offering, and because many of the companies were offering low price insurance, and that was sort of their pitch to the community, is that they were going to come in and they were going to charge lower than a Progressive or a State Farm or a Lloyd's of London. Many people, insurance agents mostly, have often wondered, how are they able to do this? Like, what are you giving up in exchange for this? And maybe this is what you were giving up, some coverage that you had foregone in the policy that you didn't really know about when they insured your home.
So to make their premium more appealing to the policy owner.
Yes,
right.
and it generates more revenue for these small insurer. It's their sort of their pitch to the how they get customers.
And then that affects the modeling. You were talking about the modeling too.
Yes. If every year when they go to the reinsurance market, I'm not entirely up to spec on how the reinsurance decisions are made, but every year they go to the reinsurance market and they purchase purchase a number of contracts, but they go to these modeling firms who make recommendations to them on how much insurance you should buy, and there's usually like a lower limit, a middle limit, and an upper limit, and the insurer makes the decision on how much they want to purchase. So the other theory is that a number of the companies relied on the same modeler's recommendation when they purchased reinsurance, and I've heard this from as far back as I'd say April, is that there's this one firm, I can't remember the name, but there's one firm who made recommendations to each company that failed, not all of them, but maybe like 6 of them. And they all sort of, they make it seem as if this is the common denominator between all the failures.
So maybe other opinions might be good to have.
Yes.
Basically what the thought is. Okay, this whole issue is sending shudders through the community. wondering what is insurance going to cost us if we can get it. So
And it makes you also wonder, well, if I was able to find a good deal, does it mean that it's going to go under soon and I'm going to be stuck?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So keep on it because we're enjoying what you're discovering. I mean, we need to get this information certainly in so many ways, and it impacts the entire community and our economy.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Michael. Thanks a lot. Eve, let's go on over to you right now. And there's a charter amendment on the ballot.
Yeah, the November election day is big nationwide. That's the off-year elections. It's not too big in Louisiana because there's no major congressional decisions that could be made. But there are some little things on the ballot. And one that's really important, at least in Orleans Parish, is one that would require that appointments made by the mayor or city department heads have to get the approval of the council. Now, you'd think it would have been like that all along because that's kind of the way that Congress does it. But no, it hasn't been that the police chief has always been the mayor, can go and say, okay, you're the police chief, you're the fire chief. And it's not that there have been bad appointments necessarily, but the council has felt that that they should have more voice. And there probably is some advantage to having some sort of interview and investigation. And so there's roughly 11 department heads that this amendment to the city charter, if passed, and the council would do enabling legislation, that the council would have to approve the appointment made by the mayor. The Bureau of Governmental Research issued a paper this week, and they strongly endorsed this. And they looked at cities around the country of the type about the size of New Orleans, and something like 80% of them had that procedure that they should do it.
Wasn't a lot of this kind of stemming from the whole Warren Riley situation, where the mayor appointed him or was going to appoint him and offered him the job, and then there was blowback, and then he was disinvited or whatever, and then there was a lawsuit?
Well, I think that might have been an example of it, but it may have raised the issue. But the issue was there. I mean, people have been wondering about it. Shouldn't there be more behind the mayor making an appointment? And so the BGR has approved it, and so it goes in the ballot. I suspect it's going to pass. Now, when the council first brought it up, because the council had to vote to propose it as a charter amendment, the council passed it, and the mayor vetoed it. And then the council overrode the veto. It won't go into effect until January of next year, and so it's not going to affect any of her people right now. It probably won't affect her at all, I would think, but certainly with the next mayor, it would be an important change.
If it should pass. So it will be on the ballot in November for Orleans Parish voters. Okie doke. All right, E, thanks a lot. Stephanie, over to you. I mean, in Mid-City, there is just such a big eyesore, and it has been there since Katrina, and it used to be such a revered place, what was Mercy Hospital, Lindy Boggs then, Medical Center, but now it's just a wreck.
It's such a shame, it really is, and unlike the Municipal Auditorium, which from the outside doesn't look so bad, as you mentioned, Lindy Boggs really, really sticks out because the graffiti vandals have just really turned this building into a real problem for the area. It's had multiple owners since it was shuttered in Hurricane Katrina, and you can see pictures of it there. That's just
terrible
an example.
graffiti on it. Yeah,
it drives people crazy, including the current owner, Paul Flower. He bought it last year from developer Joe Yeager. Flower, of course, is the CEO of Woodward Design and Construction, and I really think he had legitimate hopes and still intends very much to redevelop the facility into an elderly care complex, one of these continuum of care facilities that has like independent living, assisted living, memory care, and skilled nursing beds. And the challenge is making the numbers work and trying to secure HUD financing, which is what he thinks is the best way to move forward to make it feasible economically. With HUD financing, of course, you work through a conventional lender, and the group that he was working with here fell through. And that was not expected when he bought the property from Yeager in June of 2021. So
I was walking around that building this morning, and the graffiti, which is hideous and disappointing, is among the least of the problems, okay? I mean, just all the windows are blown out.
Right.
I mean, anybody can climb in or fly in during the night. It's just a totally vulnerable building. And
Well, so he spent $600,000 or so, he said, so far, trying to secure it, fix it up. They did some work getting water out of the basement, putting some pumps in. It certainly doesn't look like enough. I think from his perspective, it just doesn't make sense to keep trying to secure it and make it look better. He said they break in the fences. They've tried putting up certain kind of metal paneling that you can't paint on or that is harder to get in, and there's like this determination to make, just a mess of this building, and so I think he's not willing to do any more than that at this point. I said, what about hiring 24/7 security? And he said, well, if you put security guards on one side, they'll get in around the other.
So, but hopefully this project will move along, and along with his intentions. Will the bulk of the building remain, or will any of it be torn down?
It's my understanding the bulk of the building will remain. The order of nuns that had bought it, and they're still part owners in it, they redeveloped the facility next door. That is an elderly nursing home, and it's doing very well. And so they will actually run this continuum of care facility if and when it gets up and running. Flower does have a lender now that he's working with. He anticipates completing the loan application process by the end of the year, and so hopes that he would know whether HUD is willing to move forward by the middle or third quarter of next year.
Of course, it's right there at the Lafitte Greenway, where you've seen so much development, contemporary development, a lot of young people moving there.
Absolutely. There's a lot going on there. Sidney Torres IV owns a large tract of land, like 6 acres, right there in the middle of it, and he has long-term plans to develop that into multi-use, but that again is a ways away.
Okay, we'll hope that it comes to fruition. All righty, David, back on over to you. And OIG released a report about Orleans Parish safety and permits, something that you kind of knew already.
Yeah, it's interesting because it looks back 3 years at what was going on in 2019 and 2020. After the Hard Rock Hotel collapse that killed 3 workers on October 12, 2019, I and our partners at the Times-Picayune New Orleans Advocate looked at details of the GPS of inspectors who were working at that site and looking at whether it was being done safely, and compared them to the inspection reports and noticed that they weren't showing up on the days that they said that they were showing up to say, yeah, you can go ahead with the next stage of this building before it collapsed. And so we looked at that and said, well, we wonder what's going on in the entire city with the inspectors that look at all building projects, residential and commercial, and found that about 20% of the time they weren't showing up. And now the Inspector General just this week came out with a report that looks at that same time frame 3 years ago and found 20% of the time they weren't showing up, so that was no surprise to us. The thing that's interesting is that I continue to look at this issue over the years, looking at how things have progressed. There was an internal audit in 2021 that found that it hadn't got much better. It was like at 16% instead of 20%, so barely improved. And what we have found is that the city has had a real problem finding enough inspectors who are qualified to go and do these inspections. They had some inspectors who were doing commercial buildings that only should have been doing residential buildings, things like that, who didn't have the expertise they needed. And now that office is so depleted that they've just now put out a RFP, and they're negotiating with private companies to provide staffing for the office to do code enforcement inspections and safety inspections on buildings. And that's really important. I mean, not just the Hard Rock and what could have potentially been prevented there, but just last month, a man was electrocuted under a house while doing a whole home renovation on a building without a permit. And so who knows if that would have been prevented, but every time you don't do what you're supposed to do to get the permits and the inspections that you need, there is that potential that something's going to be missed and something will happen that catastrophic.
And complete a safe construction,
exactly,
certainly.
Right, and meeting codes and all the things that then can come back later and say, oh, you got to open up this wall because we never approved this, and then it's on you as the builder or as the owner to have to pay that bill. So there's all kinds of problems, and if you're not doing the inspection, you can't keep up with the backlog, then people start saying, oh, you know what, I'm just going to do this work without a permit and without inspections, and then
Not safe.
Right.
And
Not
that's
safe
what
to do
people say is happening uptown, like where they're fighting the doubles to dorms controversy and turning these houses into multiplexes for student housing without
Correct.
permits.
And they're
it's
putting
the same
in
thing.
complaints to the city, but the city just doesn't have the staffing.
don't have the people.
Now, on a temporary basis, Mayor Cantrell's administration says they're going to bring in people from the private sector to staff up that office on a temporary basis until they can start hiring people.
In terms of the OIG's report, how does this impact potential litigation for Hard Rock? Quickly.
Well, the litigation is ongoing, and they're trying to negotiate a settlement. There's also a year left to file criminal charges for the cause of that collapse and potentially against those 3 inspectors who skipped inspections. The IG has already recommended that the DA file criminal charges against those 3. DA Jason Williams says he wants to do it all together at once, and so we may be waiting another year or so before we see what happens.
Okay, so deadline is in 2023?
October 12th, 2023.
Okay, all right. Okay, time for other stories. And E, we're going to start with you.
Leo Watermeyer, who's a former state representative from the Mid-City area, lives in the French Quarter now, very much of an activist, took it on himself this week to answer the question, why is it so dark in the quarter? And the answer came of it is because the lights are broken. He found that there were 75 lights that were broken, that there were 23 broken between Rampart and Bourbon Street, 50 between Bourbon and Decatur Street. None of the lights around the Supreme Court building work, and some other miscellaneous lights. So it's all kind of issues. There are some towers called 5G towers that are supposed to go up, and they're going to have some lights, but they were supposed to be done by Mardi Gras of this year, and of course it's too late, so they say, oh, maybe Mardi Gras. Anyway, it's a big mess.
And it sounds like it's really dark.
And of course, lights not working in the French Quarter is a dangerous thing.
Yeah. Michael?
On Sunday, Rougarou Fest in Houma will be my first one since I'm a new Louisianan down the bayou.
Nice.
It's, from what I hear, it's great fun. I haven't been either, but it's just fun to say the word. Really.
Yeah, I like the word.
Yeah. Stephanie?
Just watch out for the Rougarou.
That's right. Yeah,
You know, the news is sort of tightening still further around short-term rental owners. The council took some action at its meeting yesterday that will impact the rules around that and certainly make it tougher, at least until early next year, for people that are looking to do that. So either the problem's going to get worse, maybe on the black market, illegal short-term rentals. But
Okay. All righty. David?
Speaking of the Louisiana Supreme Court today, a big decision that people convicted on 10-2 non-unanimous juries before it was found unconstitutional will not get new trials. It will not be applied retroactively, and those decisions will stand on split juries.
Okay, and that was the Louisiana State Supreme Court,
Correct.
right?
That's echoing a decision previously from the United States Supreme
So
Court.
there's no other potential?
No
remedy?
other avenue now.
Okay. All righty, guys. Thanks so much for being here, and thank you all for joining us, too. And we will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.